Hey everybody, it's Daniel from GnomeBot here, and today we are going to be designing 4 aquaponic and hydroponic gardens. We've been accepted into the Chattanooga Maker Faire, and we're going to be demonstrating some garden automation tools with GnomeBot. And we wanted to bring along 4 different garden setups that anybody can make that service anybody from just wanting some decorations on their kitchen table to actually wanting to produce some good amount of food in their backyard. So I wanted to show you real quick how I go about designing a garden. These are going to be 4 really simple gardens that anybody can make. We're going to try to source a bunch of salvage material and just really show how easy it is for anybody to be able to grow their own food with an aquaponic or hydroponic garden. So here's what I do to design the gardens, and together let's design the 4 gardens that we're going to be taking to the Chattanooga Maker Faire. Let's go. When I'm designing a hydroponic garden, there's pretty much 4 questions that I start by asking myself and helping me decide what we need. So the first one is, what do we want to grow? Number 2 is, how much space do we have? Number 3 is, what are the plants going to go in? And number 4 is, what will the nutrients go in? The very first garden that we're going to design, we're going to call Tabletop Aquaponics. And it's not necessarily for growing food, it's more of a decoration, something that can be beautiful in somebody's home. But the specific challenge of this garden is, it's for someone who maybe they don't have a backyard or even a balcony or something like that to grow food, or they don't have any interest in growing a whole bunch of gardening food, but they do like the idea of aquaponics and want to be able to see some fish and want to be able to grow some plants. So let's design a garden that can take up a really small space and would be able to have fish in it and would be able to grow some houseplants or maybe even some small herbs or strawberries or something like that. Okay, let's start with our very first garden and see if we can work through these 4 questions and come up with a good design that we could take to the Maker Faire. So the first problem that we want to solve is a garden for someone who doesn't have a yard, maybe they don't even have a balcony, and they really just want to grow hydroponic plants for show. We're going to set up, my thinking is, an aquaponic garden. Now, if you're not familiar, the difference between aquaponics and hydroponics is that a aquaponic garden, the plants get their nutrients and their fertilizer from fish waste, and in a hydroponic garden, you're dosing fertilizer in order to provide nutrients for the plants. So what we're going to set up here is an aquaponic garden that can be a beautiful show garden that someone could have in their house. So what do we want to grow? So this would be for someone who, since it's such a small space, it's not like they're going to be growing massive amounts of food or very large plants. It's probably more for decoration, and maybe they could be able to get some small herbs or something off of it for cooking with. So the what question is they're going to be maybe growing some small herbs or small houseplants. They don't really have a lot of space. This is going to be mostly for show. Maybe it's going to sit on a bookshelf or on a desk or a countertop or tabletop or something like that. So it's a really small space. The plants that they're going to grow, or actually, so the question is, where are the plants going to grow? So the plants will probably grow in the top of the tank with the roots hanging down into the tank, but I'm not going to check that off until we've actually solved that problem. And then where are the nutrients going to go? Well, the nutrients are going to be from the fish. They're going to be in a water tank. So this is going to be a really small single tank system. So my idea is to do something like this, where we would have maybe a 5 or 10 gallon tank. Let me slide this up a little bit. We'd have a 5 or 10 gallon tank and maybe do the kind of system that we would use for NFT outdoor, which is going to be a 4-inch piece of PVC with caps on both ends. Then we either could cut a giant slot in the top like this, and then we could fill up the entire container, kind of like a little canoe, fill it all up with grow medium and have the plants growing up out of the top of it. Or my other idea is to do basically a straight up NFT system with the aquaponic fish. So we would keep the top, we would cut out some little half circles, use 2-inch net cups in the bottoms of those, drop down into them. So the grow medium is really only in those little cups. Then we would have our plants growing out the top. So we're going to have some plants some house plants or herbs or anything like that, their roots are going to be able to get down into the nutrient water. Now there's two ways that we have set this kind of system up before. One of them requires a pump and a water pump and an air pump. And the way that you would do that is you would have your air pump down here, just pumping air into here, keeping the water super oxygenated for your fish and for your plants. And then you separately have to have a pump, a water pump, pumping water up into your grow bed. So the idea is that water would get delivered somewhere on the top. It's going to flow along the bottom and then drain back out into the tank. So this is all going to be water for your fish. Let's see if we can draw a little fish in here. There we go, happy fish. Okay, so the problem with that is you have to have two different systems. You have to have a water pump and you have to have an air pump. So my next idea is to get rid of one of them. So you can either get rid of the air pump, which means you need to oxygenate your water somehow. And the way that you can do that is by drilling a lot of little holes in this. So when your water flows up, you maybe deliver it at every single plant and then it's all trickling back down and aerating through that whole cycle. The other thing that you can do is instead of getting rid of the air pump, you get rid of the water pump. And the way that you do that is this. Let me draw a picture because I'm better at that. So you would have down at the bottom a hose or a little piece of pipe. I'm going to draw it out to the side instead of in the tank. And then you would have your air getting pumped right up inside of this. So you have water kind of up in the bottom of this. And your air is going to float. As you're pumping air, it's going to keep moving up this way, right? And while it's doing that, it's almost like a reverse siphon. It's going to be pulling water up along with it. Because as the air moves up, your water is going to get moved up in there. So it's not really pumping water, it's just drawing bits of water along with the air as the air moves up. So then imagine that thing getting put, right here. So then your water is flowing out into the top of that. So you have an air pump there, and then your water is moving up to the top. And I like this idea because in a really little system like this, we really don't have to churn that much water. So this is just going to be moving a little bit of water, just keeping a slight nutrient film down along the bottom for those roots to work towards. It's also making sure that your water stays super aerated, especially because we're going to have fish in this. So let's see if we've solved all of our questions. So we're going to be growing plants. We're going to be doing it in a really small space. Our plants are going to be going, I think, in the top in some little net pots, a little NFT rail right on the top of this fish tank. So we've checked that off. And then nutrients, of course, are going to be down in the bottom. So this is going to be just a really small single container system for our nutrients. So we've answered all 4 questions for our really small tabletop aquaponic system that can be a showpiece garden in someone's house. The specific problem of the next garden is limited space. Maybe for somebody who doesn't have a backyard, but they do have a front deck or a back balcony or some place that gets sun. I've even seen this kind of garden set up inside of a house. But the idea is that we don't have a whole lot of space, but we do want to be able to grow some greens or some other small plants. So let's see what we can do for that. So we're going to be designing a system here that will fit in a small space and ideally would be growing smaller plants, maybe up to as big as strawberries, but mostly herbs and greens. So that is what we want to grow, where it's in a limited space, so perhaps like a front yard, like front porch or back balcony, something like that. So first we're going to need a spot for the plants. Since the challenge of this garden is that we have limited space, we're going to try to go as vertical as possible. So I'm going to actually start in our drawing with a small water tank. So I think we're going to use a small like Rubbermaid tote or something for our tank. So I think we're going to have perhaps 3 rails. You can use like 4x4 fence post, you can use plastic gutter. We'll see when we actually get to sourcing materials what we can find for this. And in that, there's 2 ways you can do it. You can either cut a slot down the middle, cut like a several inch slot, and then stuff Brillo pad or something like that in there as a medium for the plants to be able to grow in. The other thing that you can do is just cut little notches. Some people heat their plastic with a blowtorch and then melt it so that their net pots fit in there really well. But I think that's probably what we'll do, is something like that. for net pots to be able to go in there and all the roots to just be able to work their ways down this rail. So we're going to need some kind of support structure over the entire thing, and then we'll probably use pipe hangers or a cable or something to hook these rails up onto here. Okay, so we have a place for the plants. The plants are going to be growing in here. Imagine leafy greens or strawberries or something growing in each of these. And we have a place for the nutrients down below. So we'll be pumping water from the water tank and delivering it up into the top of each of these rails. And then it'll be trickling down through all the roots, through the Brillo pad or through the net pots, and then draining right back down into this tank. So this is a really small system, easy for a small space like a front deck or back balcony. Something where you don't have a whole lot of room, but you have basically enough room for a footprint of a tote, and then you can grow the plants vertically on top of that system. So let's go through our 4 questions. What are we going to grow? Greens or herbs or strawberries, small plants like that. What's the location problem that we're trying to solve? It is a very small footprint. We have a spot for the plants, which is our vertical rails, and we have a spot for our nutrients, which is going to be the tote down below. This next garden is solving the problem of growing plants that really do need support. So things like tomatoes, especially peppers, cucumbers, beans, eggplants, things that get pretty big that you wouldn't be able to do with a straight vertical system. Definitely not in our little aquaponic fish tank. So let's see what we can do for that kind of problem. So if there's somebody that has maybe a little bit of space, they even have a whole backyard, or they have a little spot on their balcony or somewhere outside, and they want to grow bigger plants that they need more support. So we're talking about tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, eggplant, even beans. And for this system, we're going to set up a really small example of a Dutch bucket system for the Maker Faire. So the what is, we're going to be growing plants that need some support. Where is, this is for someone who has a little bit more space. Of course, it's very scalable. So if you can add 2 buckets, you may as well add 50 as long as you have the space for it. Okay, when we go to create or design a larger system like this, you're always going to have some kind of place for your nutrient water, and you're always going to have something for your plants. Now the thing is, you're going to be moving water from one end to the other and then having it drain back. So you have to have a pump either at one end or the other. So here's what I mean. You could have your your water tank uphill and your plants downhill. In this case, you would let gravity do the work from moving the water from your nutrient tank down over into your plants, but then you would have to use electricity or something to pump the water back from your plants back into the nutrient tank, right? Now you could go the other way, very simply. This is what most of our gardens are. You elevate the plants because they're a lot easier to elevate than water, and you have the very lowest part of your system be the water tank, and water gets pumped up onto your plants, and then it flows back through the system back down into the water tank. I like this system the best, or this idea the best, because it's a lot easier to elevate the plants or sink the water tank than to elevate the water or somehow dig down the plants. But really the biggest reason to pick the other way, having your plants down lower, is if the geography just fits that better. So in a system like this, always remember that you have to have your plants elevated above the very highest point of your water, right? So even if your tank is this high, as long as your water line is down there where there's some way that gravity can move water from your plants down into your water tank, then you're fine. Here's the thing, you should start at one end or the other of your system, either by starting and deciding where your plants are going to be and then working down in your system. You know, if you have a drain coming out and then you have a drain line and then a little spillway or something going down into your tank. So start either by deciding the very highest point and then working down until you reach the very lowest point, or decide the very lowest point and then work your way up. The problem with starting in the middle, that you might work one way and then design your whole garden and realize it's not raised high enough or your water isn't low enough. One other reason why I like sinking the water tank is because it can help keep things cool. Where we are in Chattanooga, Tennessee, we're getting a lot of sun baking down on that water. So if we can sink it down below ground, then we're able to use some cooling to be able to help keep this tank a little bit cooler. We're also keeping the sun's rays off of it a lot. So I'm going to model this one after what I have done in my backyard for the last few summers. So I've started with a tank. Then we're going to need some blocks and a platform area. And we're going to have some, okay, so that's our water. Then we're going to have some buckets, and I like to use 2-gallon buckets. like this. We're going to have our plants growing in that. We're going to use perlite, I think, as the medium. Then we're going to be able to use some supports, some tomato cages. We'll be able to have our plants growing all up really big out of those. We have our place for our water. We're going to need a delivery line, and then we're also going to need a drain line working back. Okay, so let's see if we answered all of our questions in this garden. What are we growing? Plants that need some support. Where or what amount of space? Well, we have a lot of space for this system, but we're just going to be setting up a real small one for the Maker Faire. Do we have a place for the plants? Yes, they're going to be in these Dutch buckets. And do we have a place for the nutrients? Yes, we have this water tank down here at the bottom. So we've answered all 4 questions for this system, for this Dutch bucket system, and let's go on to the next one now. This next garden is going to be solving the problem of limited space and also needing a lot of production. So this is a garden that we've set up a lot. It's one of my favorites, and it produces a whole lot of greens. It's really great for greens. We've seen cucumbers and beans grow really well on it. So let's see what we can do for that kind of problem. The very last and 4th garden that we're going to be taking to the Chattanooga Maker Faire, we're calling the A-frame, and it is one of my favorite gardens because it is so pretty to look at. It takes such a small amount of space, and it really can produce some large amounts of food. So we're going to be starting with the what. So this is going to be a system that grows lots of greens. It's wonderful for leafy greens, for kales, lettuces, spinaches, herbs, things like that. I think for the Maker Faire we're going to be doing some lettuce and some basil. The where problem, so in this one, in this challenge, we actually have a good bit of space. We're going to do a pretty small system to fit in our booth. But it's something that anybody with even a little bit of space, because it's vertical, can do, but you really do need some spot, either at least like a balcony or a backyard spot. The plants are going to be in NFT rails. So this is a space-saving NFT garden, and then we're going to have our nutrients in a tote. So I'm thinking about a design that's going to be something like this. So let's start with our nutrient tote. It's going to be out here to the side. Then we're going to have some NFT rails. And for this, we'll try to source, we'll see what we can salvage, but probably going to be used something like 4-inch PVC with caps on the end. The way that I like to set up the vertical A-frames is to have a whole lot of spots down on the bottom and then get fewer and fewer spots towards the tops. Since this is so modular, since you can move the plants around really easily, then by the time you're at the top, maybe you only have 5 or 6 heads of lettuce, but you have all of your starts down here and you're slowly working them up the rail or alternating rails with starts and then your full grown plants that you're harvesting. So looking from the side, it's going to be something like this. It's going to be an L, and then we're going to have some kind of pipe holders, J's or straps or something like that, holding all of the rails on that way. If you have enough space, you can do the same thing on the other side as long as you have enough sun, and double your production with only a few feet for your legs of your A. So we're looking at the front. I'm not going to draw the supports back behind it just because I think that's kind of confusing to look at. So we have a spot for the plants. These are going to be net pots in here, NFT, with the roots growing right down into the nutrient film. We have a spot for the nutrients. Now the problem is we need to get the nutrients to the plants. And this is what I've always had the biggest challenge with the frames. So I've done things like landscaping tools, something like where you pump water up into there and then it is a distributor that has like maybe 6 or 9 different lines that can come out of it. The problem is those get clogged so easily. So I think that we're probably going to do something like 2 or 3 inch, which is pretty big, line, and then we're going to do stems off of that. So that will sit somewhere up here, and then we'll be drawing lines off of it to each of these rails. Now the last thing is the drain. Now there's 2 thoughts on the drains. I'll show you 2 things that we've done. One of them is if you look at so if we were to take one of these pipes and turn it this way, so we're looking at the end, if you do an end cap and then off center do a drain line, and you either have to drill a hole and screw through it or something like that, but make sure that that's watertight. The benefit of doing something like this is that you can rotate that cap to decide your water line. So right now the water line would be right like this. And then as your plants mature and the roots get longer and longer and are all the way down to the bottom of that pipe, you can rotate the cap so that that drain line is now at the bottom. So then you only have this much water hanging out in your pipes. I like that solution, but I think for the garden, for the Maker Faire, we're probably going to do something where this one is going to flow into that one, this will flow into that one, this will flow into that one, this will flow into that one. The challenge with this kind of setup is that your nutrient solution is a lot more potent when it flows into the top. And then these last plants, which are for us are usually the starts, are missing a lot of the things that have been taken out of the water from those plants up above, and this would eventually flow right back into there. But I think that's what we're going to do just for simplicity. It also helps you manage a lot of the leaks. You have a lot fewer, many fewer leaks this way. But we're going to do something like this for the Maker Faire in Chattanooga. Okay, so I know that was a lot of talking. Hopefully the pictures helped a little bit if you could get past my handwriting and my sketchy drawings. But that's what I usually do. Those 4 questions are kind of how I go about designing a garden. Trying to figure out what the specific challenges of that garden that we're designing is. And then making sure that we have a place for the plants and then we have a place that we've thought about for the nutrient solution. So these are 4 gardens that we're going to work on for the Chattanooga Maker Faire. Assuming that we get them done, we'll come back and put links to the Maker Faire and to the PDFs for the drawings and all that kind of stuff, supply lists, anything that you would need to build these gardens down below this video. And if you have any other ideas or have any tips for any of these gardens as we start to build them, make sure to comment those down below and we'll give you credit, I promise.